Easy English audiobook.
The Gift of the Magi by O. Henry. $1.87, that was all. And 60 cents of it was in pennies. Pennies saved 1 and 2 at a time by bargaining with the grocer, the vegetable man, and the butcher, until Della's cheeks burned with the silent shame that such close dealing implied. 3 times Della counted it. $1.87, and the next day would be Christmas. There was nothing to do but flop down on the shabby little couch and cry. So Della did it. This shows that life is made up of sobs, sniffles, and smiles, with sniffles being the most common. While Della, the lady of the home, is calming down from crying, take a look at the home. It was a furnished flat at $8 per week. It was not the best place, but it was what they could afford. In the hallway below was a mailbox into which no letter would go, and an electric button that no finger could make ring. On it was a card with the name Mr. James Dillingham Young. The Dillingham had been added during a time of prosperity when James was earning $30 per week. Now that the income was reduced to $20, they were thinking of shortening it to a simple D. But whenever Mr. James Dillingham Young came home and reached his flat above, he was called Jim and greatly hugged by Mrs. James Dillingham Young, who was Della. This was all very good. Della finished her cry and used a powder rag to cover the signs of it on her cheeks. She stood by the window and looked out dully at a gray cat walking a gray fence in a gray backyard. Tomorrow would be Christmas, and she had only $1.87 to buy Jim a present. She had been saving every penny she could for months. $20 a week doesn't go far. Expenses had been greater than she expected. They always are. Only $1.87 to buy a present for Jim. Her Jim. Many happy hours she had spent planning something nice for him, something fine and rare and sterling, something just a little bit near to being worthy of Jim. There was a pier glass between the windows of the room. Perhaps you have seen a pier glass in an $8 flat. A very thin and very agile person may, by observing their reflection in a rapid sequence of long strips, obtain a fairly accurate idea of their looks. Della, being slender, had mastered this art. Suddenly she turned from the window and stood before the glass. Her eyes were shining, but her face had lost its color within 20 seconds. Rapidly she pulled down her hair and let it fall to its full length. Now, there were 2 possessions of the James Dillingham Youngs, in which they both took great pride. One was Jim's gold watch that had been his father's and his grandfather's. The other was Della's hair. If the Queen of Sheba had lived in the flat across the airshaft, Della would have let her hair hang out the window to show off. If King Solomon had been the janitor, Jim would have pulled out his watch every time he passed just to make him jealous. So now Della's beautiful hair fell about her, rippling and shining like a cascade of brown waters. It reached below her knee and made almost a garment for her. Then she did it up again nervously and quickly. Once she hesitated and stood still while a tear or two fell on the worn red carpet. She put on her old brown jacket and her old brown hat. With a whirl of skirts and with the sparkle still in her eyes, she fluttered out the door and down the stairs to the street. She stopped at a shop with a sign that read, Madame Sofronie, hair goods of all kinds. 1 flight up Della ran and collected herself, panting. Madame, large, too white and chilly, hardly looked like a Sofronie. Will you buy my hair? Asked Della. I buy hair, said Madame. Take your hat off and let's have a look at it. Down rippled the brown cascade. $20, said Madame, lifting the mass with a practiced hand. Give it to me quick, said Della. Oh, and the next 2 hours tripped by on rosy wings. Forget the mixed metaphor. She was searching the stores for Jim's present. She found it at last. It surely had been made for Jim and no one else. There was no other like it in any of the stores, and she had turned all of them inside out. It was a platinum fob chain, simple and chaste in design, properly proclaiming its value by substance alone and not by fancy decoration, as all good things should. It was even worthy of the watch, As soon as she saw it, she knew it must be Jim's. It was like him. Quietness and value, the description applied to both. $21 they took from her for it, and she hurried home with the 87 cents. With that chain on his watch, Jim might be properly proud of it. Grand as the watch was, he sometimes looked at it on the sly because of the old leather strap he used instead of a chain. When Della reached home, her excitement gave way a little to prudence and reason. She got out her curling irons and lighted the gas, and went to work repairing the damage made by generosity added to love. Which is always a tremendous task, dear friends. A huge task. Within 40 minutes, her head was covered with tiny, close-lying curls that made her look wonderfully like a truant schoolboy. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, long and carefully. "If Jim doesn't kill me," she said to herself, "before he takes a second look at me, he'll say I look like a Coney Island chorus girl. But what could I do? Oh, what could I do with $1.87? At 7 o'clock, the coffee was made, and the frying pan was on the back of the stove hot and ready to cook the chops. Jim was never late. Della held the fob chain in her hand and sat on the corner of the table near the door he always entered. Then she heard his step on the stair away down on the first flight, and she turned white for just a moment. She had a habit of saying a little silent prayer about the simplest everyday things, and now she whispered, "Please, God, make him think I am still pretty." The door opened and Jim stepped in and closed it. He looked thin and very serious. Poor fellow, he was only 22, and to be burdened with a family. He needed a new overcoat, and he was without gloves. Jim stopped inside the door as still as a statue. His eyes were fixed upon Della, and there was an expression in them that she could not read, and it terrified her. It was not anger, nor surprise, nor disapproval, nor horror, nor any of the sentiments that she had been prepared for. He simply stared at her with that peculiar expression on his face. Della wriggled off the table and went to him. "Jim, darling," she cried, "don't look at me that way. I had my hair cut off and sold because I couldn't have lived through Christmas without giving you a present. It'll grow out again. You won't mind, will you? I just had to do it. My hair grows very fast. Say, Merry Christmas. Jim, and let's be happy. You don't know what a beautiful gift I've got for you." "You've cut off your hair?" asked Jim slowly, as if he had not arrived at that fact yet, even after hard thinking. "Cut it off and sold it," said Della. "Don't you like me just as well anyway? I'm still me without my hair, aren't I?" Jim looked around the room curiously. "You say your hair is gone?" he said with an air almost of idiocy. "You don't have to look for it," said Della. "It's sold, I tell you, sold and gone too. It's Christmas Eve, boy. Be good to me, for it went for you. Maybe the hairs of my head were numbered," she went on with sudden serious sweetness. "But nobody could ever count my love for you. Shall I put the chops on, Jim?" Out of his trance, Jim seemed quickly to wake. He hugged his Della. "For 10 seconds, let us look at some other unimportant thing in the other direction. $8 a week or $1 million a year. What's the difference?" A mathematician or a wit would give you the wrong answer. The Magi brought valuable gifts, but that was not among them. This dark statement will be explained later on. Jim drew a package from his overcoat pocket and threw it upon the table. "Don't make any mistake, Dell," he said, "about me. I don't think there's anything in the way of a haircut or a shave or a shampoo that could make me like my girl any less. But if you'll unwrap that package, you may see why you had me puzzled at first." White fingers and nimble tore at the string and paper, and then an ecstatic scream of joy. And then, alas, a quick change to hysterical tears and wails needing the immediate comfort of the lord of the flat. For there lay the combs, the set of combs, side and back, that Della had longed for in a Broadway window. Beautiful combs, pure tortoiseshell with jeweled rims, just the shade to wear in her beautiful vanished hair. They were expensive combs, she knew, and her heart had simply craved them without any hope of having them. And now, they were hers, but the tresses that should have adorned the coveted adornments were gone. But she hugged them to her chest, and at length she was able to look up with dim eyes and a smile and say, "My hair grows so fast, Jim." And then Della jumped up like a little burned cat and cried, "Oh, oh." Jim had not yet seen his beautiful present. She held it out to him eagerly on her open palm. The dull, precious metal seemed to flash with a reflection of her bright and ardent spirit. "Isn't it a dandy, Jim? I hunted all over town to find it. You'll have to look at the time 100 times a day now. Give me your watch. I want to see how it looks on it." Instead of obeying, Jim tumbled down on the couch and put his hands under the back of his head and smiled. "Dell," said he, "let's put our Christmas presents away and keep them a while. They're too nice to use just now. I sold the watch to get the money to buy your combs, and now suppose you put the chops on." The Magi, as you know, were wise men, wonderfully wise men, who brought gifts to the baby Jesus. They invented the art of giving Christmas presents. Being wise, their gifts were no doubt wise ones, possibly with the privilege of exchange in case of duplicates. And here, I have told you the simple story of two foolish children in a flat who unwisely sacrificed for each other the greatest treasures of their house. But let it be said that of all who give gifts, these two were the wisest. Of all who give and receive gifts, they are the wisest. They are the Magi.